Hey guys, MetalJesus here, and today we're going to be taking a look at 10 physically released Nintendo Switch games that I've added to my collection over the last couple of months. Now, before we get started, I do want to mention that some of these games were sent to me for review, and some of them I purchased myself. However, all of the opinions are my own. Let's take a look at Wartech Fighters, a game published by Red Art Games. Very surprised to see this physical copy here, but I do love me some fighting mech games. So the idea here being is that this combines Japanese mech style anime with Western, maybe Hollywood blockbusters, at least the feel of that. But as you can see, it definitely has a Robotech vibe going on. And one thing that's important for every mech game is the ability to upgrade your mechs, and this game definitely does that. It's very fun and very satisfying to do so. It almost makes it feel, again, kind of like a role-playing game where you're just constantly upgrading your mech, getting better all the time. And thankfully, this game is pretty easy to learn and master the controls. I've played other games in the past where you kind of struggle with those controls. Not this one. You'll jump in really quick. And as you can see, the battles look great. I mean, this game has really decent graphics, so that's definitely something that's important to me because you want to see those mechs blowing each other up and kicking ass. Now, this game does suffer from some long load times, which is a total bummer because if you're like me, you want to jump in there with big robots fighting each other in space, so it's a little bit of a bummer. But, you know, besides that, if you can look past it, definitely check it out. Next up is the Shmup Collection. This is published by Pixel Heart. The first one we're going to check out is called Armed 7DX. Now, Armed 7DX is a side-scrolling shooter that, if I'm being completely honest, it's just okay. I'm not sure if I really like the graphics and the gameplay that much. It just kind of, it's not bad. It's just that it's kind of meh. It definitely reminds me a little bit of Spriggan Powered if you played that on the Super Famicom, or I guess I would say like UN Squadron, but again, not as good. The next game on here is called, I think I'm going to say this right, SATAZIUS Next, but at least here's where things get a little bit more interesting because to me, this game definitely feels more polished and fleshed out. I definitely like the graphics a lot more. And I'm definitely getting a Gradius vibe here with this game. I played this one a lot more than I did the previous one, so this is where things definitely get better on this collection. And then the third game on here is called WOLFLAME, and this is probably my favorite of the three. And as you can see by the footage here, it is a vertical scrolling shooter that definitely gives me that kind of Raiden or maybe Tiger Heli vibe. And this is the game that I think is the best on the cartridge. And I don't know what it is about vertical scrolling shooters, but I definitely prefer them. Maybe it's because I played a bunch when I was a young kid in the arcades. And again, I was a big fan of Tiger Heli. And as you can see here, it definitely looks and plays like that. Although I have to say that things blow up real good in this game, and it's pretty much all the time. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, actually. I really like it. So yeah, this is a cool collection of shoot-'em-ups on the Switch, and none of them I had played before. Not all of them are my favorites, but it's a solid collection. So if you've played it, let me know down in the comments below which one is your favorite. Next up is Need for Speed Hot Pursuit Remastered. So there's a bit of controversy with this game because, you know, EA is calling this a quote-unquote remastered version for Switch. But honestly, that is barely true because really this is just a pretty much straight ahead port of a game that came out originally on the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 back in 2010, and it's basically just the same game. Now, that said, what a game. This is actually, I think for a lot of people like me, one of the last great Need for Speed games in the franchise. And so I was actually pretty excited to get this. To be honest, actually, I downloaded it off of the eShop the day it came out because for some reason I didn't think it would get a physical copy, and then lo and behold, I walked into a GameStop and there's the physical copy. So, you know, I didn't need it, but I wanted to have this game, and it's because it's a fantastic game. It's actually made by Criterion, which made, of course, the Burnout games, and this is definitely just arcade goodness at its best. Now, it's called Hot Pursuit because you play both sides of the law. You are a racer trying to get away from the cops, and you have a bunch of tools to take them out, like spike strips and stuff like that. You'll be busting through all these police barricades, but then you could swap over and play the cops, and you have to take down the illegal racers by any means necessary. So there's a ton of content in this game. I love the level design, and also, to be quite honest, it looks really good on the Switch. Now, I said that, you know, this isn't necessarily remastered because, well, I mean, it barely is, but that's okay, because actually the game still holds up today. I mean, don't you think, looking at this footage here, it still looks and plays great. And by the way, this is probably a good time to mention that, you know, when I'm capturing the gameplay footage for these videos, I take a lot of footage and then just kind of cut it down to be about a minute or two for these videos that I do, these compilation videos. But lately, I've been uploading the raw, unedited footage to my secondary channel called MJR Extras. And so if you want to see this, basically in an unedited form, kind of get a little bit better look at maybe what you'd be buying, well, I'll put a link down in the video description below. You can check out that secondary channel because I've been uploading a lot of footage I've captured over the last 10 years there, including this. Next up is a game that I've been obsessed with for, well, probably a couple months now. That is Black Future 88. So Black Future 88 is a roguelike run-and-gun platforming game that has a really cool cyberpunk look and feel. And so in this game, all of the levels and rooms are procedurally generated to match your level and give you a sense of challenge here. And essentially what you're doing is you are exploring them, taking out all of the bad guys, swapping out weapons to hopefully get powerful enough to take out the boss, and then just continue on from there. Again, it's very roguelike. But I have to say, the platforming and also the combat is incredibly satisfying. What I love about this game is finding different weapons, because each one of them feels very different. Plus you have, I don't want to say powers, but for instance, you'll notice here that I'm able to kind of warp or leap forward. I don't know what that's called in the game, but you know, kind of like blink to the left or right. And you get all this sort of stuff to, again, hopefully help you take out the boss at the end. And I'm sort of stuck on the boss that I'm currently at, but every single time you restart a level, I just do it. I just grind and grind and grind. It's a really fun game. Plus, it's got a fantastic 80s style synthwave soundtrack. So again, it's the whole package, and getting it physical, oh, that was just a no-brainer. Oh! Next up is a game that was a talk of the internet when it first came out, and this physical copy here actually was found and donated to me by a fan of my channel named Eric. That, of course, is Untitled Goose game. And now that I've played this game, oh man, I can definitely see why so many people loved it. Actually, it's kind of funny because I remember Kelsey telling me at the time, she's like, this is her game of the year. And I was like, really? Now, I hadn't played it at the time, but now that I've played it, I can definitely see why. For one, it's just so unique, it's so funny, it's so clever. Now, if you're unfamiliar with this game, well, you play a goose that is essentially just causing all sorts of havoc around town. And again, it's so funny and so clever because you're not like a good goose. You are a goose that is causing trouble. You're basically screwing over, well, in the very first mission, you're trying to screw over this farmer. You're stealing all of his crops. You're trying to take his radio. You're basically trying to set up for a picnic that is next to the water. But you're doing more than that. You actually throw his rake in there. You're just messing with the dude. And then the gate will unlock and you go further into the city and you're stealing stuff from a vendor. You're trying to screw with this little kid. It's a pretty fun game. It's also actually pretty challenging. Like, you'll be sitting there going, okay, what do I do next? At least that's what I am. I'm like, what do I do next? How do I steal that kid's glasses? That sort of stuff. But yeah, it's definitely a very unique game. I can see why a lot of people love it. Untitled Goose game. Check it out. Next up is a game that kind of took me by surprise. It is called Wallachia, Reign of Dracula. And the reason why I was kind of surprised by this is because I hadn't heard of it before. And essentially what it is, well, you can see by this gameplay footage, it's kind of a more realistic version of Castlevania. So essentially, Dracula is causing havoc in this region, and the prince puts out a call to all the hunters to hopefully take him down and kind of rid the land of Dracula. That's kind of where you step in. And as you can see by the gameplay footage, it's going to feel very familiar to fans of Castlevania, although I will say that this game is brutally difficult. It's one of those games where you're basically gonna have to memorize, every single step and where all the enemies come from just to even get to the end of a level. I find it very challenging, almost too challenging, but there are difficulty settings, so you can have a little bit of help if you need it. So yeah, if you're a fan of this style of game and you got a Switch, check it out. All right, next up is a game that a lot of people told me to check out when it first released. That is a game called Freedom Finger. Freedom Finger. Why would you name a game called Freedom Finger? Well, I'll tell you why. It's actually perfect for this because this is a game, well, first of all, this game is completely wacky and over the top. Essentially what you are a guy who flies this fist, giving the finger in space, trying to take out Chinese terrorists that are basically trying to destroy the Earth. Again, it's so dumb, it's so funny, it's so over the top. Just go with it.
Gamma Ray, you're piloting one of the most advanced aircrafts ever made. An American masterpiece. It's called the Eagle Claw. What a sight. Reminds me of an American flag bikini. Patriotic and tantalizing at the same time. Really gets the old red, white, and blues pumping, eh?
A couple things really make this game stand out. Obviously, one being the hand-drawn style of graphics. I mean, this literally looks like someone has a pen and paper and they just drew the graphics. That's probably exactly what they did. And you may have noticed watching the gameplay footage here that it's not exactly your normal kind of horizontal shoot 'em up because it adds this ability to punch and also grab your enemies. And so if you just try to play this game like a traditional shoot 'em up, you're not going to last very long because you do have to punch things quite often because that is obviously a stronger attack. Plus you can knock ships into other ships, which again is very key to actually getting anywhere in this. And when you're gripping an enemy, you can actually use their attack against them. So there's a lot of strategy going on here, way more than you would expect. And then add into that a crazy sense of humor. Now I have to give you a warning, this is a very adult game when it comes to the language and the characters. This is not necessarily for young kids. So yeah, I can see why people thought this might be my kind of game, and they're 100% right. It's completely silly, over the top, and it's cool to get a physical version from Super Rare Games. Here's a pretty cool game called Guns of Mercy. So essentially this game is a single screen shooter with some kind of roguelike elements to it. Man, everybody's doing that these days, aren't they? Kind of adding that roguelike element to all of these games. But, it does add some depth to it and some replayability. And the whole premise here is to simply just try to survive the onslaught of enemies, screen after screen, trying to get as far as you can. And then what you do is you upgrade and swap out your loadouts in between those levels. Again, just trying to get as far as you can. It's kind of funny because initially I was like, this is kind of similar to, some games from the 80s like Galaga or Phoenix, but again, you kind of mix in a little bit of run and gun. So yeah, it's definitely got that fun, simple kind of pick up and play element to it. So, if you got a couple minutes to spare and you want to just blow a bunch of stuff up, check out Guns of Mercy. All right, I have two more games to talk about, but this next one is really, really cool. It's called Vaporum Steampunk Dungeon Crawler. This game really speaks to me because I really love these kind of old school dungeon crawlers. I'm talking about games, used to play back in the early 90s like Eye of the Beholder and Might and Magic. But again, as you can see here, the graphics are much improved. But basically it's a grid-based dungeon crawling RPG, and it's done in the first person here. And again, you're just kind of going through this, I'm not even entirely sure what it is. It's basically like a monolith. It's very, very steampunky, very mystical. You're not quite sure what's going on. And I've played these kind of games before, but often they kind of fall apart when it comes to using a controller. And that was my biggest fear with this game because, often these games are created for you to be actually sitting at a computer using a keyboard and mouse. And when it gets translated over to controller, it kind of gets clunky. Well, that's not the case with this game, actually. I find it to be very intuitive. The big improvement that they did actually was making it so that your cursor snaps to the items on the screen that you can use. So that's usually the problem with these games, because yes, you're dungeon crawling and you're battling enemies and stuff like that, but often it's the puzzle elements that can be really frustrating when they're on a console. And so it's really nice that basically, in this game, it'll just snap to anything that you can use, like a trigger button or something like that to open a door, or maybe something that you can pick up. Again, it just feels really nice. And it's pretty in-depth too. They didn't water this game down at all as far as I can tell. It's a full-blown RPG, tons of things to pick up, tons of things to read, explore. The puzzles are pretty challenging, actually. I'm stuck on one right now, so I'm gonna have to get like a hint book or look at a walkthrough or something like that. But yeah, definitely something that's kind of cool. You don't see these a lot. So if you have a Switch and you like these old school dungeon crawling RPGs, check it out. And then here's an arcade racing game that people told me that I had to check out, and thankfully it got a physical release. That is Inertial Drift. There have been other arcade racing games that have really focused on drifting in the past. Obviously the big one and the most popular one being Ridge Racer. But what I like about this game is that they took a risk. They basically said, hey, let's rethink how this whole thing works and let's build it up from the ground. And I would say for the most part, they've succeeded, because essentially what they're doing here is that they're using both analog sticks, the right and left analog stick, to really control, I guess, essentially the front and back of the car. And so essentially what you're doing is really using this analog feel to drift through all of these corners in a way that other games really haven't quite figured that out. It almost reminds me of the game Skate, how they rethought, the whole Tony Hawk idea of skateboarding. This game is kind of doing that for drifting. And the game pushes that idea even further by making some of these tracks really narrow, to the point where if you don't master the controls and you don't really get the nuances of using those thumbsticks, you're not going to get very far. But I will say it actually feels very natural and very nuanced, because again, those are analog thumbsticks. You have complete control over your car. And I know this isn't going to be for everybody, because once you get a certain style down, like again in Ridge Racer, well, a lot of people like that style because you've played it so much, and then it can be kind of jarring to come over to something new like this. At least that's how I felt. And initially I was just like, what is going on with this game? I don't get it. It's so different. But trust me, you'll do a lap or two, a race or two, and you'll get it. So yeah, it's a pretty cool arcade racing game. If you're looking for something kind of different, something new, you should definitely check this out, especially if you love drifting. All right, guys, well, it's a quick look at some of the physical Nintendo Switch games I've added to my collection over the last couple months or so. It's funny to me how many games get released physically on Switch, You always hear about the eShop and downloading, and I know there are just hundreds, thousands of games in there, but it's nice to see physical versions of these coming out, because you can never take them away. Oh yeah, baby, they'll always be in my collection. All right, guys, well, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for subscribing, and take care.